rester 4 heures comme ça, c'est une bonne leçon. Je commencerai par dire qu'à Rome, on parle latin. Moi, je parle.
He first of all said he congratulated us on our Germanic discipline for sitting through 4 hours in the morning without taking a break. Now he comes to his speech. He wants to talk about Syria and the Middle East, where France used to have a very strong diplomacy, but France has been losing speed there. And I'm speaking of that because I am an Arab. And when we speak, I tell you why I'm sitting down to give my speech instead of standing up, because in Arab we say that this is if you're sitting down, you speak reasonably. So in the country of Hegel, and in order to respect dialect, we're going to respect the dialectic by speaking German, even if we speak Latin. After this introduction, somewhat, which reminds one of the need for nuances to approach such a complex reality. I would say, first of all, that what is happening in the world today, this is my introduction, is a crusade. It's a crusade against the Middle East, a real crusade. And I'll try and show how there's a similarity between what we're living today and the crusades of the past. And it's not just a crusade, it's also a new combat after the Cold War, after the unipolar world that it was attempted to impose on us. And we cannot deny that today, whoever will win the battle of Syria will win the first battle of this world, which is tending to become bipolar. Both the United States and the West they realize that they are losing ground, and they need, if not symbolic wars, they need real wars in order to show force with Russia and China opposite them. And at the end, I will come back to this. So you see, this battle over Syria involves the entire world. It involves the United States, Europe. It involves the eastern countries that we mentioned. And of course, the geographical center, which is Syria, the Arab world, Turkey, and so on. So I begin with the Western camp, which is made up of the United States, England, France, Europe, Germany, which is dragging her feet, and thankfully so, fortunately so. We have Turkey, which is the outpost of NATO. That's more or less the Western camp. And I'm going to speak a bit about French policy, because when one speaks about the Crusades, they did the origin. The Crusades had France as a starting point for most of them. Now, do you know that General Gouraud The General Gouraud is the one who conquered Syria in the 1920s. To give you an idea, he was hurt, wounded in a battle, and at the hospital he said, he was asked, do you prefer to stay a few months and your arm will be well in a few months? Or do you want to go back to the battle? And if you want to go back to the battle, we have to cut your arm off. So this General Gouraud said, okay, amputate my arm. And he was at the head of the French troops that bombarded Damascus in Syria, which had just elected a parliament in democratic fashion, and which was planning to set up a state which would represent all of the Middle East, Libya, Jordan, and so on. And this was Hussein. So why should I talk to you about General Gouraud and Baysat? Because this general, when he was at the mosque of the Umayyad in Damascus, that's where the grave is of Saladin, which is a big symbol for Islam and for the Arabs, because he is the one who liberated Jerusalem. And this General Gouraud, when he was standing in front of the tomb of Saladin, he said, here we are back again, Saladin. Nous revoilà, here we are. So this is a very direct reference to the Crusades. So when we say that the war which is now going on in Syria is a new crusade, which involves Western forces, we're not far from the truth. On the contrary. So that means that all of the colonial wars that were waged by France and England, for the most part, because Germany was not really a colonizing power, although everything is relative. And it's a spirit of the Crusades, which is being reborn. This colonial war in Syria, in application of Sykes-Picot, then there was 2 centuries of occupation of Palestine and Turkey and Antioch. Geographically and geopolitically, they're very close. Now, let me remind you of some things about the actual Crusades at the time. We're told today that the Pope has to excuse himself, has to apologize for the Crusades. Say, why did the Christians come here? And so, but honestly, if the Pope was supposed to apologize, he should apologize to the Christians in the East. Because if you look at the history of the Crusades, it was after them that most of the Christians were forced to convert to Islam. And that's a fact. When Jerusalem was taken, if you read the Crusades, you'll see that they were proud that the blood arrived up to above the feet of the horses. And whose blood was it? It was the blood of Jews and Christians. And the so-called crusade to free the Holy Sepulchre, this was only a pretext. In fact, in the different crusades, the kingdom of Byzantia was looted. And this is where I come close to His Excellency the Ambassador. For Huntington, Christianity is Western. and not Eastern. And that's really an absurd statement. It's certainly not worthy of a historian, because you had John of Damascus was the first philosopher even before Thomas of Aquinas. And he was a spokesman for this Eastern Christianity. We're going to get to the war in Syria. But all of the Christians in the Middle East are threatened. And not only the Christians, but any minority. Why? Because the Western policy today is playing the card of orthodox, ultra-orthodoxy, the Sunnites against the Shiites. And to my sense, this minority has a very, very interesting message to convey. But coming to what's left of the French policy, we have to go back to Francis I. He had two preoccupations: the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany, and an alliance with the Turks to go against the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians. So he obtained the capitulation. He got the right to save the minorities. And he did save them. So when we speak of the Arab policy of France, what does that mean? It began with Francis I, who avoided the massacre of these minorities. And that was taken up again by the Gaullists in France. But what did de Gaulle bring to this as an extra point? De Gaulle wanted to get closer to Germany. He wanted to eliminate the so-called Franco-German rivalry, and at the same time to preserve the right of the minorities. But today in France, what is left of this Gaullism? Not much. Why? If you look at French-German relations, it's not really a big love story. There are new forces in Europe which are being born and which are growing geostrategically. Be it France or Germany, these are countries. They're like vassals, and they're not independent. I don't think in no case does Europe have an independent policy. When the Europeans wanted to create an intervention force, the Americans never allowed it. So a country which is respectful has to have military means, has to have the means to defend itself. And if the United States can impose itself today, it's because they're able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of men very quickly. They have a whole arsenal, artillery, ships, and so on. So we Europeans have been marginalized. And there is a certain, the roles have been distributed among the different actors, and the role that France has become is not very nice. France created the Syrian National Council. And what is the majority of this council? They're Islamist. In the SNC, 2/3 of them were Muslim Brotherhood members. So don't tell me that this crusade was done in order to create democracy or to free democracy. No, it began for economic and political reasons in order to assert power and to set up a confrontation with the East. Because if Syria falls, the way is open for the destabilization of Iran and of Russia and of China, because there's a moral problem and a problem of interventionism. Under what right do foreign troops come into a country, or troops that are financed by foreigners come into the country in order to reverse a government? And if it's done in Syria, why not in other countries? And by doing so, France is sinning against her own principles, and that's true of all the West. Here we are in Germany, the country of Kant, and there's an ethic. But tell me where that ethic is in this intervention. Where are the values of the Christian West? Where are the values of the French Revolution? The right of people to decide on their own government. So France seems to me to be really open to all the possible criticisms you could imagine. We're told, oh, we don't want to arm these rebels. They don't say rebels, they say revolutionaries. In my opinion, the real revolutionaries have disappeared, and we just have extremists and rebels today. But they say, oh, we're not arming these people. We only furnished glasses that allow them to fly at night. And then he says, to put the icing on the cake. But they are paying other countries to arm those rebels. And that way they get the means to, the electronic means, for example, to make the arms they have be much more powerful. But to dare to say that other countries have to arm these countries, for example, England, which will do it. And this brings back a parallel with the Crusades, because England participated in the Crusades. And today, England is involved in all of the conflicts in the Middle East. Tony Blair is an envoy for war, much more than an envoy for peace. And so we wonder where France is going, but also where is Germany going? Because we cannot deny that Germany is an important country. And I see Germany from the outside. I've never lived here. But I think, honestly, you can understand this as you want. Maybe I know nothing. But I think, as a geopolitician who was born in Syria and who has lived in France for 40 years, I think it's time for Germany to decomplexify after the Second World War, and that Germany takes up the means it needs as an economic power. I don't think I could continue to live if somebody tried to take away my means of existence. And Germany is always being marginalized internationally, although it's a big economic power. And why isn't it on the the Security Council, for example? But the Germans have to get rid of their complexes about the Second World War, because now we're building a new war. How long are we going to submit ourselves to the American dictates, economically, politically? Personally, if I were German, it would really disgust me. It's illogical. I would be happy to hear what you have to say about this, but personally, I think that in this crisis, today, for example, Tony Blair advises Turkey to deploy Patriots at the Syrian border. Between us, I'm not really afraid of the Patriots. I think maybe if the Americans hired a few German engineers, the Patriots might become more performing. Because from what I understand, they're not that great. And the number of missiles that would be launched, these Patriots would not really stop many of them. But that really revolts me against this American arrogance. Why should Patriots be deployed at the Syrian border? I could tell you why. But the Turkish parliament voted to intervene in Syrian territory. For the city of Haleb, for example, the media, they don't say a word about it. These Western media are really like you could die laughing if you listen to the information they give on Syria and on the Middle East. All the information is falsified and corrupted. It's a military campaign that was preceded by a very, very long media campaign to prepare the public opinion for an intervention into Syria. And why Syria? Now we come to the question of the Shiites. The crescent. The Shiite crescent, I would say that I am the author of that term. I've been teaching geopolicy in France, geopolitics, for about 30 years in France. And when there was the Iranian revolution, I know that al-Assad arrived in 1970. He came to power in 1970. And Hafiz al-Assad is Alawite. So he belongs to a minority Shiite community which was persecuted for centuries. And to give you an idea of the hatred of all of that Western propaganda and this ultra-Sunnite propaganda, and one of the slogans of the rebels is to say the Christians in Beirut, the Alawites in the caskets. They should all die and be buried. This just to give you an idea of the hatred. He said that in Arab. If an Alawite arrived in some villages, garbage would be thrown at him. So, you know, when the war broke out between Iran and Iraq, and this is where I don't agree with His Excellency, the Ba'ath was not helped by the West. On the contrary, But the Iraqi Ba'ath was used to go against the Syrian Ba'ath party. And the only Syrian Ba'ath who supported Iran against Saddam Hussein was the Syrian Ba'ath. So follow my reasoning. When Assad arrived in power in 1970, he was helping the Shiites of the south of Lebanon. And at that time, I said in my courses that there's a Shiite crescent that is being formed. And I didn't make that up. It's because I read the history of the 11th and 12th centuries, at the time that the Fatimi created a whole area of power. And at that time, Iran was not Shiite like it is today. But the idea of those Shiites was to create from Egypt to Syria, and they wanted to encircle Baghdad, the Sunnite Caliphate of Baghdad. And that's the historical Shiite crescent. And Iran did become then Shiite. And this crescent is positive concept today. It's a revolution. It's a revolution against a certain Western thought and against an ultra-Orthodox Islam which refuses any free interpretation. That's why you have the jihad, the personal effort. Because the Shiites have not stopped having a personal examination of their consciousness. So it is a revolutionary concept in itself. But after that, I was invited to the Inter-Army Defense College. And this is interesting. That's why I'm telling you about it. And at the first conference that I gave, it was about the Shiite Crescent. This is a strategic military school which educates about 500 engineers per year from throughout the world. And I spoke of this on French television. And a few months later, the Jordan King Abdallah, who's a Sunnite but Husseinite, who was Shiite in the beginning, but he changed because of the policy of the Ottoman Empire. So the Shiite crescent scared King Abdallah. Why? Because France, after the Ottoman Empire was dismantled, you had a natural border in Syria which goes all the way up to the Taurus. So that all of this region on the border with Turkey did belong to Syria. At 3 different times during history, for different reasons, France wanted to give concessions to Turkey or whatever, and so they gave some of the land to Turkey, and Syria lost a lot of land that way. And this was also true of the capital of the Christians in the East. The real capital is Antioch. And if you read the Acts of the Apostles, this is where the Christian was called a Christian. It was Antioch. And everything that the French monarchy did not dare to do, well, the French Republic did it. And he did it in order to put a wedge between Germany and Turkey. And that was done after there was a fake referendum. And by doing so, France basically decapitated the Christians in the East. And they eliminated the historical capital of Christianism through Antioch. Because this city was created by a general from Alexandria. In Sykes-Picot, the north of Iraq, you're going to say, wait, you're getting carried away now as a Syrian. But I'm going to say this, in Sykes-Picot, Mosul depended on the blue part, was part of the blue part, that is, belonged to France. But then the French gave Mosul to the British in order to have 23% of the revenues from an oil company. So how do you think that people here have Western values? In the fact that we break up a country, part to Turkey, part to the Britain, part of it to Jordan, and then in order to let Israel to exist. And then today you have the reason for the battle for Syria today is in order to break apart Iran. But for example, look, take the case of Iraq. Before Iraq was taken apart, there was a Madrid conference. Yeah? And we said, we're going to make some peace with the Arabs. We're going to console them by bringing them to Madrid. And nothing came out of that peace. And then the West forced Arafat to sign the Oslo Accords. And I was against those Oslo agreements because the Palestinians didn't get anything out of them. And if you break apart Syria today, what will happen? And in Iraq, they took apart the only army in the world that had not signed a peace agreement with Israel at a discount rate. So because that's what's demanded of Syria today, to sign a contract at a discount rate. It's ridiculous. They say, why don't you rent the Golan Heights? What is this supposed to mean? The Golan is Syrian. But everybody in the West is defending that policy. Because Syria has a big army. The Syrians are like the Germans of the Middle East, I don't know. And I'm proud of it. I might be ambassador of Frédéric Larousse. But in this popular literature, in order to humiliate the Alawites of Syria, they call them Germans. Say they're not really Arabs, they're just what's left over from the people who came for the Crusades. So you see how deep this hatred can be. Who started this propaganda against the minorities? Well, it was our allies. Who's going into Africa to set up Alawite camps? You take an African, you send him to Mecca. He learns what Wahhabism is. He goes back. He's sent back into his country in Africa. He brings his Wahhabism with him. And then you say to him, okay, now you take power and you expulse all of the moderate Islamic people. There are wonderful things in Sunni Islam. That's not what I mean to say. But there is extremism, too. Look at Baghdad, for example. There was a holy man called Abu Asur, something like that. And there was a cabal against him. So the people demanded asked that he be crucified. And he was crucified at the gates of Baghdad. One of his disciples comes by and says, Abba Mansur, he's speaking Arab. He says the lowest step of mysticism is what you see. That is the crucifixion. But you see how much Sunnite Islam produced of tremendous, extraordinary spirituality. And all of that patrimony is being just given up in order to support a sect, a Wahhabite sect. The Wahhabism does not really have deep roots in Islam. It's a political-religious movement which was born in the 19th century. And what happened? We know it, all of us here. We're all under American dictate. Because the Americans signed with the Saud family, with all of its princes, who are looting the resources of Arabia. And it's not even their wealth. But in 2005, Bush renewed the contract that for Saudi oil, you will have our protection for another 60 years for the Saudi royal family. And this really shocks me. I grew up learning about the age of enlightenment in Europe and reason and so on and so forth. The morals of a person like Kant. So how am I supposed to admit such a policy today? And there we see that your movement is really something extraordinary because it's the dissonant note in this whole landscape. Hegel said of Bonaparte, I see the spirit of the world on a horse. I won't say it in German, but I read it in Arab, actually. But frankly, it's true that Bonaparte did incarnate a certain ideal of revolution at the beginning. And in our world today, we need an ethical ideal which is free of the American dictate. I don't know why all of us should be paying the American debt. There's a lot of hypocrisy today, but no one is standing up in the West to denounce such a masquerade, which may very well lead to a world war. Come back to the Shiite Crescent. Russia had given, for example, arms to Iran in the conflict against Iraq. But what is the story with Iran today? I don't know. Why shouldn't Iran have a nuclear power? Why not? I don't know why. Why are other great powers not on the Security Council? Why? Well, there are many reasons you could say, but you won't really find an adequate response or answer. I can talk to you about the Americans also, but I want to go into Syria a bit. in order to contradict some of these media which are hiding the truth. I'm in contact on a daily basis with people in Syria. I come from Aleppo myself. And of the 3,000 factories, there are just a few tens left. They're being bombed by the rebels. Mr. Ambassador spoke of 5,000 jihadists. But in fact, there are more, a lot more. By plane, people are imported from Yemen, from Somalia and other places. These rebels who come in order to fight in Syria, to massacre the minorities, to eliminate the moderate people. If you're walking down the street and somebody says something to you, you have to say, God is great. You have to keep screaming, God is great, God is great, when you're walking down the street. What is this supposed to mean? Why do you have to do that? And then you're told that the government army bombs pharmacies. Now, let me make this clear. I'm not defending the government in Syria. There is a real problem there, but that is no justification for what is now happening in the support that these rebels are getting from the Western powers. One very simple example. Before the events, the right arm of bin Laden called Al-Qaeda to surrender, to go into Syria. And a few weeks ago, al-Zahiri again called on Al-Qaeda militants to go to Syria and to fight there against the regime. How can you explain such paradoxes? How should we, in the West, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and the U.S. is now sending arms to the jihadists in Syria after fighting them in Afghanistan. You could die laughing with such paradoxes. You can't help those rebels. In the beginning, I was told, Mr. Tahhan, you're a liar. It's not true. And now the Islamist emirs, with two of its groups, I didn't understand that. But what's clear is that these Islamists are in Aleppo, and they're setting up the so-called tribunals. And they say, okay, no, we're now here in power. We're going to have a different kind of law. And it's a kind of medieval Sharia. People are executed with no lawyers, with no trial. This is just expeditive justice. Now, is the West really not just hypocritical, but criminal? The weapons that England is going to send, what are they supposed to be used for? To massacre people. And now, why the Crusades? Well, during the Crusades, there were Christians who fought with the Muslims against the Crusaders. And there were also Muslim Arabs who made a pact with the Crusaders and who betrayed their brothers. And what's happening today? Well, Saudi Arabia and Qatar represent those kinds of Bedouins from the time of the Crusaders, and they joined the Western camp for different reasons. But what's shocking is how the Western media really treat people like poor, really very naive, as if they have no means to judge them, of judgment by themselves. And we're not told the truth, but they think we don't realize it. And in fact, we are now participating in a crime, because arming the rebels in Syria is participating in a crime. Organized crime, by the way. Why? In order to break the wings of Iran. It was not possible to attack the Hezbollah or Iran directly. The Hezbollah has about 50 to 60,000 missiles. They can attack Israel. And as Mrs. LaRouche said this morning, where the terrain is being prepared. First you had Gaza. They couldn't attack the Hezbollah directly because it's not a state. They couldn't attack Iran directly because it's big. It's a big country with hundreds of thousands of missiles. The United States, Israel, everybody would have to join in a war against Iran. So, what was left? Syria. And so we had this Arab Spring, which came. And then it wasn't necessary to really provoke things before an attack was launched. And this Arab Spring, in quotes, was simply distorted and diverted in order to turn it against Syria. And if now they start arming the rebels, the army is going to fall apart. One example from the rebels in Aleppo. You know this sad story of this small town in France where the people were all burned in a church. And there was it's called Oradour in France, and there was one of these in Aleppo, there's one area which has very old buildings, very beautiful. And Assad used to dine in one of these luxury hotels there, in an old house, Christian house, Azamaria. And the Islamists attacked that hotel. And they went after all of the Alawite families were gathered together in the hotel. They brought 2 cans full of gas there, and they burned the entire hotel down for 2 days. And there was not a word in the Western media about that. The Syrian Observatory in London didn't talk about it. This observatory is supposed to be a human rights organization, but why didn't they talk about it? Not a word. All they say is there are so many dead today, so many people died today, so many people. But they never say that these deaths are caused by the rebels. And in the pharmacies, it's the rebels who are looting the pharmacies because Aleppo, in order to punish Aleppo, because the Aleppan people did not turn against the government. And that's why the factories are being burned, are being bombed. And if you look at the strip of land between Turkey and Syria, that's where the Crusaders were also. And this really closes the circle. You have the West with the benediction of the West, and you have the outpost of NATO in Turkey, who were going to wage a war against the Shiite Crescent. This Shiite Crescent, for me, was a positive concept, but King Abdullah took it over as a term to say it was a danger. But if the Shiite Crescent were allowed to be united, it would become not a crescent but a full moon, and it would have tremendous power, and maybe that's what scares the Western countries so much. At the end, I will tell you, although I didn't take all of my time, but there's a double standard. I'm going to respect the German discipline, although you don't respect it. I take a shorter time. If you wage this war, what will happen is that you will have even more wars. And then you will have the choice between either the rebels will invade Europe as well, and maybe they'll get beyond Poitiers this time. Or the alternative is that real revolutionaries, after this ultra-Orthodox crisis, these extremists will go beyond Poitiers. And at that time, the Arab Spring will not be Arab, it will be European. Thank you for listening.